Now let us talk about signaling. Well, you remember your market for lemons, where we talked about the used car market. Now, buyers, they know that there are some bad cars in the used cars, but they don't know which car is which. And we also realize this that the possibility of selling the bad car has completely crowded out the good used car market. So adverse selection has created problems there. But what if these good quality car sellers could have signaled in some way that they are the better quality producers? And buyers should buy it from them, at least those who want to buy a good quality thing, right? That is an idea. So, and how can they signal? They can signal through warranties. Well, the good quality car sellers will have no problem in giving a warranty that in case if the product turns out to be a lemon, we will pay you back, like that, right? So let me just write that. So adverse selection is an outcome of informational deficiency. Right. We have seen that the possibility of selling the bad cars has completely crowded out the market for the high quality cars. But what if the information could be acquired or the information could be improved in case of the high quality car sellers can give some signals that they are in fact the high quality car sellers? What if? Information can be improved by high quality sellers signaling credibly that they are high quality. They are in fact high quality. And what kind of signals they can provide? They can have warranties. They can have preferential, what do you call, some kind of credentials they can give. Or they can give references from previous clients. References from previous clients, etc. So those things. Don't you think that you also signal, I mean, when you want to get into D school, or you want to get into ISI, or you want to get into some good college, what are you doing? You are giving a signal to the job market or the labor market that you are hardworking. That is the reason you have got through this college. You're intelligent. That is the reason you've got into this college. That's an idea. So let's talk about signaling, the kind of the model which we want to talk about. So let's say there is a labor market And in that labor market, there are two kinds of workers, high quality workers and the low quality workers. A labor market has two types of workers. High ability workers and a low ability worker. So high ability workers has the marginal productivity of AH, let's say. And the low ability worker has the marginal productivity of AL. And the another assumption is that, of course, the marginal productivity of the low ability worker is less than the marginal productivity of the high ability worker. Then the another assumption is that a fraction H of all workers are high ability. So this would mean what? The fraction 1 minus H of all workers are of low ability. Right. And you know it from your intermediate micro course that the firms are going to demand labor up to the point where real wage is equal to the marginal productivity of the labor. So firms are going to pay wages according to the marginal productivity of the workers. So each worker is paid his expected marginal product. Each worker is paid his expected marginal product. Now, in case if firms, they know it very well that the person whom we are encountering is the high ability person, they will be paying him his marginal productivity, which is AH. If they say that this person who is standing before them is a low ability worker, they will be paying him the low wage that is according to his low marginal productivity, which is AL. So if the firms or if the firm knew each worker's ability or each worker's type. So in case of the firm can decipher that the person whom they are looking at is the high ability or low ability, if they can very well find this information, then they will be paying the wages according to their abilities only. Then they would pay each high ability worker WH equals to AH and pay each low ability worker WL equals to AL. But if firms, they cannot identify that which worker is which. So if they cannot identify, looking at the person, whether he is a low ability or a high ability person, then they will have to pay the expected wage. If firms can't tell workers type, then every worker is paid the pooling wage rate, or in this case, expected wage rate. Expected wage rate, right? That is the expected marginal product. That is the expected marginal product. So what I'm trying to say is this, that in this case, they will be paying this. So for high ability, they know that H proportion of the total workers are high ability. So they'll be paying WH to them. And 1 minus H proportion of the total workers are of low ability. They'll be paying this guy. And and they will be paying wages according to the marginal product of each of these. So they'll be paying wages according to the marginal product of each of these, right? Okay. Now comes the signaling, right? So if the expected wage is less than the marginal product of the high productivity person, then high productivity person will be in a trouble. High productivity person will say, bhai, I want my wage, I want the higher wage. But this problem is arising that the firms are giving me a lesser wage. This problem is arising because firms cannot distinguish whether I am a high ability or a low ability person. So high ability person will say that why don't I give a signal to the labor market, signal to the firm that I am high ability. And the way they will be giving signal is by acquiring education. So please write this. So if WP, which is 1 minus H AL plus HAH, this WP is less than AH. So means expected wage, which is expected wage, which is the wage which is going to be there when the firms cannot distinguish between the high ability and the low ability. So they say this, since we cannot distinguish, we don't know. I mean, everybody will be saying that they are high ability, but we don't know unless you come and start working for us. So they will be paying a lesser wage to the high ability worker. And this is going to create the tension in the mind of the high ability worker. They will be thinking that we have to now signal to the labor market, signal to the firm that we are high ability. The wage rate paid, if this is going to be the case, then high ability workers have an incentive to find a credible signal. And what kind of signal these high ability workers are going to acquire? They're going to acquire the signal of education, let's say. So in case if person is going to be passed out from D school, from ISI, from IIM Ahmedabad, that's a signal to the labor market that they are good workers. They will be high ability workers. They will be hardworking workers. So they don't have a problem in paying them higher wages. So what kind of signal they will be giving? Workers can acquire education. Can acquire education. But you're not going to acquire education for free. So there'll be the costs which are associated with education, right? So education costs, a high ability worker CH per unit. And education is going to cost low ability worker CL per unit, right? CL per unit. And the assumption is that CL is going to be greater than CH. And the assumption is that CL is greater than CH, right? And the idea is that people are acquiring education just to signal that they are hardworking. Education per se will have no effect on their productivities. So in case if education will have no effect on the workers' productivities, then the cost of education is a deadweight loss, right? So suppose that education has no effect on workers' they have acquired education just to signal to the market that they are hardworking. That is, the cost of education is a deadweight loss. Cost of education is a deadweight loss, right? Okay. Now, let us find out the conditions under which the high ability worker will be acquiring education, right? High ability worker will be acquiring education. So the reason the high ability worker would want to acquire education is that in case if the wage difference is going to be more than the cost of education to the high ability worker, right? So what I'm trying to say is this. Supposedly you are the high ability worker and I'm the low ability worker. You want to acquire education. So you will be acquiring education if the wage difference between you being the high productivity and I being the low productivity individual, that wage difference, because this productivity difference is creating the differences in wages, that wage difference is more than the cost of education. So high ability workers will acquire education units. If the wage difference between the high ability and the low ability, that wage difference is basically the difference between the productivities, that is greater than the cost of acquiring education. So you want to acquire 1 unit of education, it is going to cost you CH, 1 into CH, because CH is the cost of per unit, right? You want to acquire EH units of education, the total cost is going to be CH into EH. So this difference, the difference in productivity, is more than the cost of acquiring education. In productivity is more than the cost of acquiring education, right? So, and if these low ability workers, if they are going to acquire EH units, that cost would be more. Then high ability workers will definitely acquire education. You're getting at the point what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that high ability workers will acquire EH education units if, first, listen to me carefully, this condition hold. This is condition 1. And this condition hold, which is condition 2. Condition 1 is the benefit which the high ability worker will have of acquiring EH units of education. But beta, high ability worker would want to have education as a signal. High ability worker can show that I have acquired better education than the other one. So if the other person is not able to acquire education and you are able to acquire education, it means that you have given the signal. Because just by looking at your education, we'll be able to understand whether you have acquired the education or not, whether you have the ability or not. This is what the firms think. I'm again telling you, beta, you are the high ability worker. I am the low ability worker. If I want to acquire, I'm the low ability. If I want to acquire EH units of education, but it is costing me more, I will not acquire. If you want to acquire EH units of education, but it is costing you less. I mean, when I say costing you less, I mean in comparison to the difference in productivities. You are acquiring education because you would want to show that you are a better productivity person, your wages should be higher. So the first condition is telling you the benefits which accrue to the high education person, right? And the second condition says the um, the uh, the cost or the cost of acquiring EH units of education by the low ability workers, right? That is there. So this is the cost of acquiring education, cost of acquiring EH units of education by high ability. This is the cost of acquiring EH units of education by low ability workers, right? By low ability workers. Are you getting the point? You are high education person. Sorry, you are higher ability worker. You will be acquiring education if it is going to benefit you more and it is hurting me more. I am not able to, because if I am also able to acquire education, then how will you distinguish? We are distinguishing it in the way that I am not able to acquire education and you are able to acquire education in such a way, right? So together you can write, but are you getting it? Huh? So it is AH minus AL greater than CH into EH and AH minus AL less than CL into EH. So from here I can write AH minus AL upon CH greater than EH. And from here I can write AH minus AL upon CL less than EH. So EH has to be smaller than this, but EH has to be bigger than this for these two conditions to hold. So they together require AH minus AL upon CL AL upon CH. So if this is going to be the case, then the high ability workers, they can separate them out from the low ability workers. So they can separate them out from the low ability workers. So please write acquiring such an education level credibly signals high ability allowing high ability workers to separate themselves from low ability workers themselves from low ability workers, right? So given that the high ability workers are going to acquire EH units of education, the question which is going to arise is that how much units of education low ability workers should be acquired. So given that high ability workers acquire units of education? How much education should low ability workers acquire? Well, the answer in this case is 0. So if they want to acquire units of education, uh, then they will be paid only AL. And the cost of acquiring education is more than the difference in the wages which they are going to get because of this. So the cost of acquiring education is more than the difference in the wages which is going to happen. So ideally, I mean, in case if they want to acquire unit, then they should not be acquiring any education. So the answer is 0. Low ability workers will be paid WL equals to AL as long as they do not have units of education. Right. And even if they have units of education, they are worse off. Why? Because the cost of acquiring education is more than the benefits which they are going to get from acquiring education. The difference in productivity, the difference in the wages is less than the cost of acquiring education. Cost of acquiring units of education by low ability workers. And they are still worse off. And they are still worse off if they do, right? Uh, but don't you think that this pattern is indeed an equilibrium, right? Because if each high ability worker is going to choose units of education, and each low ability worker is going to choose 0 level of education, then no worker has a reason to change his or her behavior. And the education level of the worker can in equilibrium serve as a signal to the labor market. This is an example of a separating equilibrium, right? Uh, so because in case of the separating equilibrium, each type of worker is making a choice which is allowing him to separate himself from the other type of the worker, right? So separating equilibrium. Separating equilibrium. Hmm. This is indeed an equilibrium. Matlab, this condition, I'm not defining separating abhi, I'll just define a separating equilibrium. This is indeed an equilibrium. If each high ability worker chooses units of education, and each low ability worker chooses 0 units of education uh, and no worker has any reason to change his or her behavior, right? And here the education level can act as a signal to the labor market that since I have acquired education, I am a high quality worker. Since the other person has not acquired education, he or she is the low quality, low ability individual. Uh, So due to our assumptions about the cost differences about the cost differences the education level of a worker can in equilibrium serve as a signal to the different productivities. The different productivities. And this type of signaling equilibrium is called the separating equilibrium, right? Because each individual worker is making a choice that is separating him from the another type of the worker. This type of signaling equilibrium is called separating equilibrium since equilibrium involves each type of worker making a choice that allows him to separate himself from the other type. From the other type. And the another possibility is the pooling equilibrium, right? So pooling equilibrium is the one in which each worker is making the same kind of choice. Here, is making the same choice. So, for example, the cost of acquiring education for the high ability is more than the low ability workers, supposedly. So, initially we have assumed that the cost of acquiring education, per unit cost of acquiring education by the high ability is less than the per unit cost of education of acquiring by the low ability. But here we are assuming the other way around. That is, suppose CH is greater than CL, right? So the high ability workers, they have higher cost of acquiring education than the low ability workers, right? So what could be shown out here is that the only equilibrium involves is that all, because now even the low ability worker can also acquire education, right? So how will high ability worker will be separating himself from the low ability worker, right? So in this case, can be shown that the only equilibrium involves the workers all getting a page, all getting a wage, or getting paid a wage based on their average ability. So in this case, no signaling is going to occur. So when both of us can acquire education, then how will you distinguish yourself from me? There's no way. So there is no signaling. So no signaling occurs. So no signaling occurs, right? So, and one important point which Varian is making, it's a very beautiful point. He says this, that separating equilibrium is inefficient from the social point of view. Why does he say this? That each high ability worker would want to acquire education just because it can signal to the labor market that he is high ability and you should pay him the higher wage. But education per se is not affecting the average productivity or the marginal productivity, right? So able workers, the high ability workers, are wanting to acquire education just to signal the labor market, right? Because not because it is going to make them productive, but it is just distinguishing them from the low ability workers. That's it. The same kind of output is going to be produced. because they could have produced this output even with no education. But uh, uh, in case if there would have been no signaling in the formal education. So what Varian is trying to say is that in this model, if you are acquiring education, that is a total waste from the social point of view. So the separating equilibrium, I want to write this line. I know this recording is getting lengthier, but I just want to do it in one recording. So that is the reason it is getting lengthier. I'm so sorry about this. Separating equilibrium. Equilibrium is inefficient from social point of view, right? So each high ability worker would want to acquire education, not because it is going to increase the productivity, but it is going to increase the wages. But this education is going to separate him from the low ability. The high ability workers want to acquire the signal. Signal. Not because it makes them productive, but just because it distinguishes them from low ability workers, right? Exactly the same amount of output is produced, even if this education would not have been acquired. So from the social point of view, uh, the acquisition of signal in formal education is a total waste. Exactly. The same amount of output is produced in the separating equilibrium, and as they would be if no acquisition of signal in the form of education would happen there, as would be. If there were no signaling at all. So in this model, the acquisition of signal is a total waste from the social point of view. But Varian says this, that one thing you have to understand, that this kind of inefficiency, this is arising because of the externality. So what kind of externality? If both able and the unable workers, if both the high ability and the low ability workers, they are paid the same wage, then the high ability workers will feel the pinch, will feel that we are high ability, why are we paid low wage? They are feeling the pinch. So they want to separate themselves out from the low ability workers. So from the private point of view, it is giving acquiring education is giving them the benefit. But from the social point of view, it is not. So there is an externality. Just the presence of the unable workers, just the presence of the low ability workers is also depressing, is also decreasing the amount of wages which are being paid to the high ability workers. Because firms say that we cannot distinguish between the high ability and the low ability, although you know about yourself, but we don't. So we are going to pay you only your average wage, average pay. High ability workers, they feel pinch. They want to be paid higher. They say this, that it is due to the presence of these low ability workers, we are paid lesser. So we try to distinguish ourselves. We try to separate ourselves from these low ability workers. And how do we separate ourselves? We will separate ourselves from the low ability workers by acquiring education. So from the private point of view, there is a private benefit, but there is no social benefit out there, right? So this is all about the signaling model, right? Thank you, Beta.